You're tuned in to More Living with Jim Brogan, broadcast live from the Brogan Financial Studios at News Talk 98.7, where old-fashioned values, expert knowledge, and genuine understanding come together to give you the retirement straight talk you deserve. Jim's a former National Advisor of the Year recipient and a financial educator, and he's here today to talk about how you can live out the best years of your life. Jim and the Brogan Financial team have been helping retirees and pre-retirees across the Southeast for over 20 years in their pursuit of financial independence. You can reach them during the week at 865-862-6800. So sit back, relax, and get ready to learn, because More Living with Jim Brogan starts now.
Hello, East Tennessee, and welcome to More Living with Jim Brogan, where it's all about living the best years of your life your way. As you're listening to News Talk 98.7 WOKI, I hope everybody is taking good care of themselves. There's a whole lot of stuff going around right now. I've been a little under the weather the last 3 or 4 days, and hopefully I can get through this show without coughing too much. But just be careful. You know, wash your hands, use disinfectant, get outside as much as you can, and take care of yourself. You know, Republicans now hold a slim majority in both chambers of Congress, and Trump is getting ready to take over the executive branch on Monday. Will Congress work together to make some impactful legislation? Joining us today is East Tennessee Congressman Tim Burchett. Congressman Burchett grew up in the Knoxville area and served as Knox County mayor for 8 years. Prior to that, of course, he served in the Tennessee Congress. He currently serves on the House Committees on Oversight and Accountability, on Foreign Affairs, and Transportation and Infrastructure. And he just is returning to the Hill for his fourth 2-year term as the 119th session starts. A longtime friend of the show. Good morning, Tim. Welcome to More Living.
Hey, thank you for having me back on, brother. It's a pleasure, and I'm sorry you're under the weather. I just hope it doesn't infect me over the phone line.
No, it won't. It won't. I'm slowly getting better. It was pretty rough Wednesday night and Thursday, but it's getting better. Hey, I guess these last 2 weeks have been pretty eventful, right? Talk about what the 2 weeks has been like from your perspective as you all started back your latest session. And you got the confirmation hearings going in the Senate. Tell us what's going on in the House.
Well, everybody's I guess maneuvering in the new power positions, you know, as this slim majority that we've had again continues. I think right now what we're really moving towards, there's a lot of organizational things. There's been some shakeups. They took the fellow out of who was chairing the Intelligence Committee, which I think was a good move, actually. And we're moving towards the control of the House, the Senate, and the White House, again, with a slim majority. But what we're really dealing with, you've heard the talk about Trump saying he wanted one beautiful bill, and now they're saying maybe 2 bills, and now they're going back to 1 bill. The reality is Trump doesn't really give a rip about how many bills we have, if we have 50. He just wants results, and he gets very tired, as I do, with the nonsense that, you know, it's going to take 6 months to get a bill together, to do this, to do that, when in reality, if we just sit down and work like most Americans do, but the tradition of the Washington, D.C. swamp, which is really just a sewer, is that we continue down this same path. And I hope that we move towards some fiscal sanity. It's not clear to me just yet if we're going to do that. People are, a lot of the folks outside of Congress are talking about the DOGE, for government efficiency, Department of Government Efficiency, and they're talking about reducing the debt by $2 trillion, which is an incredible amount of money. But the reality is, at the horrible rate we're going right now, that is just 2 months of our deficit spending towards our debt. We run up that's just 200 days. Every 100 days, we run up $1 trillion, and neither party has any plan to pay it back, nor do they want to. It's about staying in power, and unfortunately, there's about 25 to 30 of us that are what I would call true fiscal conservatives that vote down that line every time. But the rest are, kind of tax and spend, and let's get through the next election cycle type of folks, and then let's see. And I get very frustrated, Jim, with people that say, well, we got to pass this time so that next time we can fix it. There is no next time. I feel like we're going off a fiscal cliff with the, well, you're in money. You can explain it better than I can, but just hardworking Tennesseans are out every month. It costs them $600 to $800 more just to survive than it did maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and that's primarily because of our incredible deficit spending, and we just we've not sent any signal to the markets or the bonds or anybody else that we are growing up and going to manage our money. So,
it's interesting.
That's what I'm dealing with.
Yeah, it does seem like it's become a little bit more the mainstream in Washington talking about the debt problem. You've called the nation's debt, which is currently more than $36 trillion, our single biggest threat. Typically there are different ways to bring that down, but our deficit spending is so high. Where do we need to start on this? I mean, what is your recommendation of what we can do to fix the debt?
First is, of course, people, Medicaid and Medicare are the largest things, and nobody wants to touch them. So let's move them off the table for now. Let's talk about the Pentagon. The Pentagon is, and I call them war pimps, and people don't like it, but that's what they are. They do not, their business is war, and it's been very good here lately. And you have members of both parties that, lo and behold, own stock in several of the missile defense companies and others, and you can watch it on, I think, at the website or a Twitter page, The Whales or something like that. And the Pentagon has not passed an audit in the history of audits in our last, I think, 8 audits, and that we've audited them. And then how do we punish them? With billions and last National Defense Authorization Fund, we gave them, I think, $6 or $7 more billion than they even had asked for. And then the other is education. We need to, and everybody will cut this, they'll listen to this, and my enemies will take this out of context and cut this whole thing down. But listen to what I say all the way through on education. Close down the Department of Education. Shut it down. And then that's where they stop. But send the money to the states. Let the states and the local legislators. I mean, Jim, they're like the mob. The Lord only takes 10% off the top, but the Department of Education, when it was created by President Carter under his administration, there was already a Department of Education, but it was given cabinet level. So they got this huge department in Washington, D.C. There's not one bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. that's taught a kid how to read, write, or do arithmetic at Sarah Moore Green Elementary School in Knoxville, Tennessee. It's a bureaucracy. It's a one-size-fits-all thing, and what works in New York or Washington, D.C. or Los Angeles does not work in East Tennessee. It's been proven time and time again. Cut the bureaucrats out, you'd have savings there, but you could pay your teachers more. The unions ought to get behind that movement, but they won't because it's about power with them ultimately. And send the money to the states. Let your local school boards and your legislators decide where that money should go. If it's in reading or whatever or programs there, let them do that, and quit with the federal bureaucracy. We could save trillions of dollars just by that, and then that's a start. And there's talk of closing down the ATF. It's actually ATF is alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. They need to. The FBI does that. I think the locals, your local TBI, Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, and your local states would be better off doing that. Start there. There's so much overlap between all of our federal agencies. The IRS needs to be cleaned up. I'm a United States congressman, and it takes 6 to 8 weeks for me to get a response from them. They've done this work at home stuff, And here we are. You can't get a response from them. You can't get a response on any of the other bureaus. So I think we need to just start going through those departments and shutting them down and consolidating that power or the responsibility, if you will, into other departments. And I think you could go a long ways.
It's certainly good to have some focus on government efficiency, and hopefully there will be a lot done to streamline some things. We've certainly got a lot of challenges. We're visiting with Knoxville Representative Tim Burchett. When we come back, I want to dive into some of this. You mentioned the Pentagon, and you know that kind of brings up the war machine. I do want to talk also about the ceasefire in Gaza and really kind of dive deep into some of these subjects. So stay with us as we visit with Tim Burchett. This is News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
Welcome back to News Talk 98.7's Brogan Financial Studios, where Jim Brogan is coming to you live with important news and advice to help you achieve your dream retirement. Get ready to learn and live. Here's your host, Jim Brogan.
Welcome back. This is More Living right here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI. I'm your host, Jim Brogan, and we're visiting with Knox Representative Congressman Tim Burchett. Just started his fourth term in the U.S. Congress. You know, I do want to ask you, Tim, now that you're in your fourth term, you know, it seems like up till now you've been kind of the newcomer in town. That seems like it's not the case anymore. But has the D.C. experience been what you expected? I mean, I'm sure there's been some surprises, but has it been just radically different than you expected, or has it been kind of what you would expect?
Well, the biggest surprise I had, Jim, was that I was not surprised. You know, I've dealt with egos in Nashville, and when I was county mayor in Nashville for 16 years. And I just was not surprised because it's, you know, you just get in line. There's 435 of us. I joke that I'm the 435th most powerful man in Congress. But the truth is that it's a crooked system. You know, you have to raise money. Both parties do this. They send you a bill. You have to raise money for your conference and to go up in the committee system or to become a chairman. And we've literally had people in the past that have written a personal check and gotten to be chairman of a committee, if you can believe that. And I've said if Congress was the NFL, Peyton Manning would still be waiting to get in. They don't put the best players in. You sit there, you know, we had a chair lady out of Texas just now, Republican, who I'd been calling out for years on these things. They found her, you know, for 6 months she'd been living in a retirement home, a memory loss, Alzheimer's type situation. And, you know, and it just goes on and on and on. And you have these huge staffs. If you're a committee chairman, you can have 50 people or more working for you, and they keep it running, and it's their gravy train. They're making hundreds of thousands of dollars and incredible contacts, and they go on nice trips, and you know, and all this stuff is legal the way they do it, the way they structure it, and so it just, you know, it's the public just doesn't see all this, and I call it out. I had one of the members of leadership came to see me a couple of weeks ago on the House floor and said, "Hey, man, some of the leadership saw you on a podcast or on one, maybe I was on Fox News, I can't remember." And I called them out on it. You know, I said, "Look, you got to pay to move up." And I said, "That's just not right. That's crooked." But the press is in on it. I mean, they even so bold as they put it on a piece of paper on letterhead and send it to you. And both parties do it. It's been going on for years, maybe decades. And then I said to him, I said, "Well, what I said was the truth, though, right?" And he said, "Well, yeah." He said, "But they just don't like you saying it." And I just laughed, and he laughed, and then he took me out for chicken wings the next night. So, yeah. But, you know, it's a crooked system, Jim. It really is, and it needs to be changed.
Yeah, I had spoken with someone a couple of years ago, or maybe I'd read a testimony from a congressman that was a rookie and said the thing that shocked him most is he pretty much had to spend half his time fundraising. I guess you call that dialing for dollars.
Yeah, and I mean, when I first got there, a member, I had to meet with him over my committees, and he said, He said, now in the future, Tim, here's how it's going to work. We're going to look at how you vote, and we're going to look at how you do across the street. Now, what was across the street? Well, across the street is the Capitol Hill Club or the RNCC, the Republican Congressional Committee, whatever. They got a building over there, and you cannot technically you can't raise money in your office. We follow those rules. I don't know who all does and who doesn't, but yeah, if you got to call somebody for raising money, you go across the street and make those calls. And they literally look at how you do, and because you have to raise it for the conference, for the other races, because my bill is not as high as a lot of people, just because I don't have a lot of billionaires that support me and do that. I have some, and I'm very grateful. But I don't have, we don't have an oil district or a high-tech district or thing like that, where like California or a Texas or something like that. So, and it's very tough for somebody like me to stay competitive in that realm.
So, Tim, let's talk about, as we're visiting with Congressman Tim Burchett, let's talk about the impact of Trump coming in. He's, making some waves with his cabinet picks. He's been making waves. And, he seems to be bringing in a lot of outside ideas. You mentioned the Pentagon and about them not passing an audit the past 7 or 8 times. He certainly has done one of his more controversial appointments for the Department of Defense, Pete Hegseth. How do you feel about a Pete Hegseth? Do you like the out-of-the-box thinking? Is he qualified?
Yeah, what it amounts to is the people underneath. You finally got somebody who's actually served in combat. That's not going to – our military, let's just be honest, our military has become an experimental proving ground for wokeness. You have men in dresses that literally going out and recruiting and then promoting that to the to the public, and our enemies are laughing at that stuff. So immediately you're going to see – and he talked about bringing back the warrior – ethic or something. I can't remember exactly his words, but Pete gets it. I think I've talked to him before. I think he gets the program, and it really matters who he puts in. And I've said this before, but when the president comes in, they take out the top person and put their person in, and that's about where it stops. That's where it's different with Trump on this go round. The last go round, he trusted people around him, and they honestly did him in. The Speaker of the House did him in. The Republicans. They didn't. They gutted him, really. They went behind him and stabbed him in the back, and he didn't realize that, I don't think. I mean, it was just so big. But I think he gets it this time. That's why the sweeping changes that he's making in these departments are going to cut a lot of the fat out and get to the people that actually do the work and do away with it. During the Second World War, I think we had 6 generals, I believe that's right, and now we have 22. So the military has become incredibly bloated. Now, this is going to send some shockwaves. They said it at first, and then it pulled back. They pulled back on it. But Doge talked about using drone technology instead of having live American pilots. You'd still be a pilot, but there would be drones flying with them. And that would be a huge savings over training and the aircrafts as well. And so that kind of went away really fast. I suspect the big boys screamed about that to Trump and said, hey, we've got our money invested in these planes. And we've got also, we have defense systems that we build and then we mothball. They talk about these aircraft carriers. It's not your dad's and my dad's war anymore. The Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and then 6 months later, we start rolling across the Pacific. It's not like that anymore. It's going to be handled very quickly, I believe. And there's always going to be need for men and women on the ground. But I think technology is taking care of a lot of that, and it is much more destructive than when our fathers went to war.
Congressman Burchett, we talk about the war machine and how powerful that is. Are they going to sit by and allow Trump to completely overhaul the Department of Defense?
No, No, they will fight him every step of the way. Members of Congress in both parties. Look, this is another part that's corrupt. This is why part of the reason we're $36 trillion in debt. You know, you pass. Why do we pass these 3,000-page budgets instead of individual bills like we do in Tennessee and balance our budget? It's because there's so much hidden in there, and they owe so much to these companies. Some of these guys, I'm sure, have their wife and or girlfriend working for these lobbying firms or these defense groups in both parties deep enough that they just have their fingers in the pie too far in, and they're going to backdoor the president every chance they get. And I suspect what will happen too, and this will be in the Doge type thing, the Senate will come out with some really conservative proposals, and the House will come out with some very conservative proposals or pass bills, and that none of them, and the leadership or the people, the big boys and girls in charge, they're behind the scenes, will wink and nod, because those two will never align. They will, and then we'll say, "Oh, the Senate won't work with us," and the House will say, the House will say the Senate won't work with us, and the Senate will say the House is not going to work with us. You know, it'll go, and then nothing will happen, and we'll go back to our old ways. That's my prediction. And then I predict Elon and Vivek will be very frustrated very fast. But I hope the American public is paying attention. I hope I'm wrong, and I hope that they realize what's going on and they call us out on it.
I think the American public is more in tune than they have been. You know, when it comes to the federal budget, it is always contentious. And as you mentioned, legislators, they're always adding riders, additional bills to budget appropriation. And most of the time, they don't even have anything to do with the federal budget. So how can we get that process streamlined? I mean, you just touched on it, but how can we streamline it?
Well, if we'll get some people with some guts, and it goes back to the American public, if they'll pay attention and start holding us accountable when they're, you know, and what happens, Jim, is they've got to pay attention to every little bill that they vote on in the committees and on the House floor, because they continuously sell us out. They go home and they throw the red meat out, and then they go to Washington, and then they vote very liberal, and or they cut deals. And you can follow people. There's all these ratings, Heritage. There's all these tax groups and fiscally responsible groups that rate your congressman. And I would suggest people go on those sites and subscribe to them and follow the votes of their representatives, because it's pretty telling, really. It's some of these darlings of the party, and that make the circuit on television and radio don't vote as conservative.
We're visiting with Congressman Tim Burchett. When we come back, I want to know about his view on the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and are we going to see a tax increase at the end of the year, or does he expect Congress to get something done? So stay with us. This is More Living with Jim Brogan here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
Welcome back to News Talk 98.7's Brogan Financial Studios, where Jim Brogan is coming to you live with important news and advice to help you achieve your dream retirement. Get ready to learn and live. Here's your host, Jim Brogan.
Thanks for tuning in to More Living with Jim Brogan, where it's all about living the best years of your life your way. This is News Talk 98.7 WOKI. Check us out online, broganfinancial.com. You can podcast all of our shows, are actually on our website. If you click on radio, you can also listen to us at Spotify, Apple Tunes Podcast, or your favorite podcast source. We're visiting this morning with Tim Burchett, Knoxville. Of course, he represents the 2nd District of East Tennessee in the U.S. House of Representatives. He is beginning his 4th term. And let's talk about taxes, Tim. It seems like the two biggest things that the Trump administration has focused on in the whole election cycle was border security and economic growth. And one of the things that goes along with economic growth is income taxes. And the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which Trump signed into law, effective the beginning of 2018, is set to expire at the end of this year. Do you expect, with all the different priorities going on, do you expect taxes to be addressed fairly early this year?
Yes, and that is one of President Trump's biggest concerns, that those tax cuts stay in place. We go back and forth on that. I would like to see some offsets. Honestly, I'd like to see when we make these tax cuts that we also cut the size of government that it's supposed to be funding. It just seems to go down a hole somewhere. I'm a big believer in tax cuts because government's gotten too big. I don't think the American public, when they get this money, that they're sticking it in a pillowcase under their bed. I think they're buying cars, they're buying houses, they're paying for their kids' education, they're saving the money so the banks can loan it out. I think it grows the economy, and I think it'd be detrimental to do away with those tax cuts. But I still have reservations on the fact that we continue to grow government. In one of the tax cut plans that I've seen that's out there, they have the money that's saved, they stick it right in the Pentagon. Just blank check them almost, billions and billions of dollars, and just throw it right at the Pentagon. And I don't think that's the appropriate way. I think once you make the cuts, you make the cuts. When I was in the state Senate, I was on the finance committee, and I had a bill that saved $6 million. And I remember a Democrat colleague of mine who was a good friend, he was straight up, but he different philosophy on money and spending. And he said, "Man, this is a great bill." And I was like, "Well, thank you." And he said, "I know exactly where I want to spend that $6 million. And that is the mentality of people in government. They cannot, it's like a kid, when you give them $10, it's just going to burn a hole in their hand just to spend it as fast as they can.
Yeah, it's easy to spend other people's money, isn't it?
It is, and that's exactly what we're doing.
I do want to, Congressman Burchett, get into a few of the initiatives that have been important to you. You've worked on many pieces of legislation to support our troops and our veterans. So where could the federal government be doing a better job, especially for our aging veterans?
Exactly. Well, I think that the VA, for instance, it's another agency. I think we need to look at the bureaucracy. I think that American fighting men and women, they ought to be able, if they were honorably discharged, they ought to be able to take their, I think it's a DD 214, that shows that they were discharged honorably, basically. I think they ought to be able to carry a card and walk into any doctor or medical care facility in the country and hand them that card and be entitled to reimbursement. I mean, that the doctor or facility would be entitled to reimbursement, and stop with, they have to go up to Johnson City to get care. And then the people up in Johnson City do great work, but the bureaucracy there between Washington and that, and just getting care to our folks, it just, to me, again, it's another bureaucracy that takes a cut off the top. And we ought to be able to, they ought to, if there's a veteran in Knoxville, Tennessee, that needs to see a doctor, they ought to be able to see the doctor in Knoxville, Tennessee, and not travel somewhere and not have to wait in line and not have to do all that. I saw it with my father, and I've seen it with other veterans, and it's just, the bureaucracy is ridiculous, and it needs to end. And that would be one way, and that would free up more money so we could provide for them. I hate what happens here when you look out in Knoxville. When I was mayor, at one time, over half the homeless folks out on the street were veterans, and that there's a mental health component that needs to be addressed there too. And I just think we need to look at it from more of a holistic approach and try to get these folks some care.
Yeah, I think on the one hand, I do think the last 8 years or so, it's become more dominant in the country psyche in terms of understanding we need to treat our veterans better. But we're still woefully behind from my vantage point. Like what you just said, half of the homeless are veterans. I mean, that's just sad. It can break your heart. And so we definitely need to improve things there. Now, this past week, Congressman Burchett, you introduced a bill called the No Tax Dollars for Terrorists Act. Talk about this bill.
Yeah. Well, there's a former Navy SEAL named Sean Ryan who has a podcast, and And honestly, it's one of at one point it was the most viewed podcast in the country. I think on Spotify, past a lot of past Joe Rogan and some of the others up. And he has found out through sources that money that we're sending for supposed humanitarian aid is getting straight to the Taliban, and it's about $40 million a week for what we could find. Gosh. So I was told last week someone is supposed to connect me with a whistleblower, and they think it's closer to $140 million. I don't care if it's 50 cents, but I asked the Biden administrator that's supposed to be overseeing this about it, and he said, well, it's just a small. He said, no, they're not. And then I said, well, what about this? He said, well, that's just a small percentage. And, they send these people. We don't realize this, but we're sending billions of dollars over to Afghanistan where we left there. And so allegedly under humanitarian aid, and it's being taxed, so it's taken straight out the top and it goes straight to the Taliban. And look, Jim, these people will hate us for free. We do not need to be paying them any money.
Yeah.
And I couldn't even get our senators to pay it any attention. We passed it in the House unanimous. I raised hell about it. It went to the Senate. No, and we're going to look at it. They didn't do anything.
Schumer didn't even put it on the floor, right?
Well, I couldn't even get a Senate sponsor. Is the sad truth of it. And so let's just look at that. And that's for another day. But now we've got the new senator out of Montana. Marjorie Taylor Greene was close to him, and she put a bug in Trump's ear about it. Trump's fired up about it. Elon Musk has tweeted about it because I wrote this letter, and he retweeted the letter, and it went viral. Now I've got Tuberville and the fella Sheehy, I think's his name, out of Montana, who is a former Navy SEAL as well, and they're going to sponsor it in the Senate, and then hopefully we can get this thing to the president and stop this nonsense. But again, this is the type of thing people ought to be hammering on. It should be front page news, and for whatever reason, I think part of the problem is Washington would have to admit they made a mistake, and it's people in both parties. So I think we need to address stuff like this, and this is tip of the iceberg. $40 million, and then you talk about, and the people up in North Carolina and upper East Tennessee that were hit through Hurricane Helene, they're still without running water and electricity. They're still living in dadgum tents, and we're throwing this money out overseas, and it's just pathetic.
Yeah, I think it's naive to think with the amount of money we're sending over there that some of it's not winding up in the hands of the Taliban and other terrorist organizations. It's kind of horrifying to hear that it had such support in the House and then couldn't really get any traction in the Senate. I know Sean Ryan. Let's see, he's a former Navy SEAL and he lives here in Tennessee now, right? He's over in the Franklin area.
Yeah, he is Middle Tennessee. Yeah,
I just kind of was turned on to him 3 weeks ago, and it's interesting listening to his podcasts. Somebody who obviously served our country valiantly in the SEAL teams. Now, Congressman Burchett, you did reintroduce a bill to force TVA salary disclosures that passed through the House. Tell us why this bill matters to people in East Tennessee.
Well, TVA was created to serve this area, and I think that it's important we know what we're paying these folks. A lot of people don't realize that we pay the head man at TVA. I believe his base salary is $8 million, and then with bonuses, he'll make over $10 million this year. Now, I like the guy. Personally, I consider him a friend. That's not my business, but the truth is that they've that's up to the board. That's the board's decision. All the board gets elected, they're gonna do something about it, and they don't. They get rolled. It's all every one of them, and they'll argue and say that it's keeping up with the market. I'm not arguing about that. That's up to the board again, and the president who will appoint that board. President Trump is very unhappy about that pay, but it is. But the other folks underneath him, they are that it should be public record. It should be public record how much they make, and it currently is not. So I think
Tim,
that
is there a difference in that? They're a public entity that's owned by the government. Did I say that right?
I believe so. Yes, sir.
Now, those incomes, though, they're funded through TVA revenue, correct? Or they actually do taxpayers help fund that?
I believe it's through TVA revenue, but again, as I state, it's kind of like the post office. When they're in trouble, they need federal help, but when they're not, they say, we're not a federal agency. Well, if they want to break off from us and to get out into the private sector, then go ahead and do it. But until then, and then I don't have any right to know how much they're paying unless I'm a stockholder and go through that. But in reality, they are a government entity, and we have a right to know. That's my whole point in all that.
Yeah, I know you've always been very, very big on transparency. I think most people support the notion of more transparency in government. I think when I hear, I think of when we go down along that path, I think of both transparency and efficiency. Do you think things can really be different this time around with the different perspective that's coming into Washington now in terms of efficiency and transparency?
I think it can. Again, I think it's going to have to happen in the first 100 and 150 days because we will lose our interest, just like drones. Remember, drones were the big deal about a month ago, and now you never hear anything about it. Heck, one was sucked up into a airplane engine in California on one of those planes that pours the water, and it comes down and dips the water out and throws it on the fire, and there's no news about it. Yet that was the big news. So I would warn people, I always say Americans want their pizzas in 30 minutes or less, and that's about our attention span. And I'm guilty of that. Please be consistent, and please pay close attention to this savings and the transparency, because we're not going to get another bite of the apple like we have right now.
Yeah, I do think movement among the people is the way to really impact change. I know I had heard a couple of years ago, Congressman Burchett, I was at a business conference, and the keynote speaker was actually Trey Gowdy, former congressman from South Carolina. And, Of course, he had a very unique relationship with Tim Scott, but he was saying that Washington, D.C. is a lagging indicator of what's happening in America, not a leading indicator, meaning it lags what's going on in the public. And it's just so interesting to see. Go ahead, Tim.
No, I'd say I agree with that.
Yeah, and it's just so interesting because just even since the elections in November, there's been a kind of a sweeping tide with changes. I mean, some people would look at that positively, and some people, of course, look at that negatively. But it is pretty interesting. I think the people creating the public pressure to do things like being more fiscally responsible and getting our arms around the debt and having less deficit spending is really what can drive change. We're going to go to our last break. When we come back with Congressman Burchett, we'll talk about issues right here in East Tennessee. So stay with us. This is More Living here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
Welcome back to News Talk 98.7's Brogan Financial Studios, where Jim Brogan is coming to you live with important news and advice to help you achieve your dream retirement. Get ready to learn and live. Here's your host, Jim Brogan.
Thanks for tuning in. This is More Living here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI. I do want to invite you to my first class. It's through Pellissippi State Community College. Thrive Financially in Retirement. It's through their Lifetime Learning. It's at their Hardin Valley campus. It is a 2-night class where we break down 7 key areas of financial planning for retirement. If you're close to retirement or already retired, then this class could be good for you. You can find it. It is on February the 4th and the 11th at 6:30 p.m., 2-hour sessions. Again, February 4th and 11th. You can go to PellissippiRetirementPlanning.com. to download a syllabus and find out more. Again, PellissippiRetirementPlanning.com. I'd love to see you at the class. I teach that with my colleague at Brogan Financial, Eric Ballou. Today we're visiting with U.S. Congressman Tim Burchett, who of course represents Knoxville and represents the 2nd District of East Tennessee. And Congressman Burchett, Knoxville just received a RAISE grant to build a pedestrian bridge to connect the UT campus to South Knoxville. What other bills or programs do you see coming to the area in the coming year?
I don't know. What you saw in a lot of those grants was the blue areas. I think Memphis, Tennessee had qualified for the first one of those. And then and Knoxville has moved more towards the left, actually. And then you see, and that reflects what's in the White House. And so I suspect it would be more of a county-type grant situation in the future under the Trump administration if grants are out there. And they generally, these grants, though, are asked for in like a bulk or a big area, and they don't necessarily list the specifics. And so it kind of that's generally how those things happen. You say I want it for transportation needs in this general area, and then that's where that money ends up. And then the locals are allowed to make the final decision on the specifics of where it goes.
You know, as in East Tennessee, we're always thinking, how can decisions that are made in Washington affect our life here locally? Are there things you would like to see done that would positively affect those who live in our area here in East Tennessee?
Yeah, I think overall, if we could just get our spending in line and in the federal government, and then we would see the productivity increase in our local areas. I think until we get the national debt situation, I think that's going to affect everybody, and then that will affect our local economy in ways we can't even imagine. So until we do that, you know, and I'm not I'm really leery of the federal government reaching down into the locals, into local governance. When I was county mayor, I didn't like the state of the feds coming in and doing things. And case in point, I remembered we lost local restaurants because of a federal law, because too much grease was ending up in our waste stream, in our sewage systems, and it blocked sewers. And so what did they do? They told all the restaurants that they had to have a type of grease trap within a certain amount of time. Well, the big boys could handle that, and they were the ones who were pushing it. And everybody was saying, oh, it's environmental. The big corporations are taking responsibility for the environment. Well, in fact, all they were doing was eliminating their smaller competition, because the mom and pop restaurants couldn't afford this. And so we lost, when I was mayor, I think it was 3 that ended up closing up in the downtown area and they were replaced by ones that could. But and some of them never replaced. But that's generally a top-down type of thing, and you're seeing that as well with meat processing. There's Thomas Massey out of Kentucky has a bill that it's called the Prime Act, and the federal government has taken over meat processing. And they're saying, you know, oh, we're doing it for your health, and all the do-gooders, they got all these do-gooders out there doing it for our health. Well, guess who owns all the meat processing now? China and Brazil, and that's who controls it. And so we've got to get that back into, and Thomas Massey and myself, I'm a co-sponsor on it, but he's doing all the heavy lifting. It's his, he knows the process a lot better than anybody else. But that's what I worry about with the federal government reaching down and doing things. It sounds good on the surface, and it just causes destruction at the local level.
Yeah, there's all the butterfly effect. There's always so many ramifications we don't necessarily understand. Congressman Burchett, I'm so sorry we're out of time. It's just flown by. Thank you so much for taking time out of what I'm sure has been a very, very busy couple of weeks for you. Good luck through the year, and thank you for coming on again.
Thank you, brother. Please pray for our country.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the greatest things we can do is pray for our country, pray for our leaders, those that we agree with and those that we don't agree with. Thank you for tuning in this week to More Living with Jim Brogan. Thank you to Wayne for engineering the show. Thank you to Jill for helping produce the show. Have a great week. This is News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
The views expressed by Jim Brogan and his guests are not that of Cumulus Media. Any discussion of financial, legal, and tax planning strategies is not intended to be individualized advice and is general in nature. Always consult with your advisor for advice specific to your needs. This program's content does not represent a recommendation of any particular security, strategy, or investment by Jim Brogan or Brogan Financial Incorporated.